the Egyptian deity. In the earliest days of Egypt's spiritual awakening, long before the rise of mighty pharaohs, or the erection of monumental temples, before the names of Osiris or Ra echoed across the Nile Valley, there stirred a presence so subtle, so profound, that few could name it, and even fewer could understand it. It was not a god of form or function. It had no animal shape, no thunderous voice, no tale of conquest or love. It was not seen in the stars or heard in the cry of the hawk. And yet, it was there, in the breath of wind over desert sands, in the hush of twilight, in the stillness before sunrise. This was Amun, the hidden one. Amun was not born of spectacle. He did not descend from the heavens with lightning nor rise from the earth with fire. His nature was wrapped in secrecy from the beginning. He moved invisibly, his presence more a sensation than a sight, like a flicker in the periphery, a moment of stillness that made the hairs rise on the back of the neck. In Thebes, a city still young and rising, Amun was honored in hushed tones. There were no sweeping processions, no grand statues of gold. His worship began in modest shrines built of mud brick, with offerings of water and incense. Simple prayers whispered to the unseen force that seemed to guard the valley from within the shadows. This was not a god of spectacle or rule, not yet. He was a force, an awareness. To the early Thebans he was the mystery behind all things, the essence that gave rise to wind, the breath of the world itself. His very name, Amun, means the hidden, and he was that which is always present yet never revealed. In this way, Amun was not only divine, he was metaphysical, a concept as much as a being, a divine mystery, the unknowable behind the known. The people of Thebes felt his power in ways they could not describe, and this feeling gave rise to reverence. Over time this reverence became ritual. Priests were appointed to interpret his silence, to guard the doorways to his sanctuaries, and to record their insights in hidden texts. These priests would later become the most powerful spiritual caste in all of Egypt. But at the beginning, they were humble seekers, trying to understand the nature of the unseen. Amun demanded no grandiose displays, only attention, devotion, silence. The land itself seemed to reflect him. The shifting sands that swallowed and revealed relics, the veils of fog that rose from the Nile in the mornings, the stars that disappeared and returned each night. The cycles of life, death and rebirth, each carried within them the mark of that which could not be seen but was always felt. As Thebes grew in prominence during the Middle Kingdom, so too did the worship of Amun. When Egypt was unified once more after centuries of disunity, it was Thebes that led the charge. And the kings who rose from its walls looked to Amun as the source of their divine legitimacy. For a king to rule justly, he needed more than armies or wealth. He needed Ma'at, the divine order, and Amun was increasingly understood to be its source. But as Thebes expanded, so too did the image of Amun evolve. He was no longer simply the hidden wind. He began to be fused with another great deity of Egypt, Ra, the solar god of light and kingship. This fusion was not sudden, nor arbitrary. It was a theological revolution born from both necessity and inspiration. Amun was the unseen force behind all life. Ra was the visible force that gave life through light. Together they formed Amun-Ra, the hidden light, the creator who existed before creation, and who brought all things into being through will and radiance. In this divine union, Amun-Ra transcended all other gods. He became the embodiment of duality, that which is and that which is not, the seen and the unseen, the manifest and the transcendent. Amun-Ra was described in hymns not merely as a god among gods, but as the one from whom all gods arose. In the sacred temple texts, he was praised as the Lord of the thrones of the two lands, the maker of men, and the one who remains hidden in his name. The great temple of Karnak was built as a physical echo of his grandeur. Not a single structure, but an entire city of worship. Karnak was a complex of obelisks, columns, sacred lakes and dark inner sanctums, designed to mirror the universe and to channel the hidden force of Amun-Ra. Only the highest priests and the king himself could enter the deepest chamber where the god was believed to reside, not in flesh, but in symbol, in silence, in the darkness behind the veil. What made Amun's cult unique, even among the rich religious landscape of ancient Egypt, was its intimacy with mystery. Where other gods had origin myths and visible domains, sun, war, sky, river, Amun's domain was the mystery itself, the idea that behind every visible reality lay a hidden cause, a source untouched by time. His power was not just in the world, but beneath it, in the heartbeat of the universe. And it was this mystery that gave Amun his endurance. When invaders came, when dynasties fell, when foreign gods were brought to Egypt's shores, Amun remained. Even when Pharaoh Akhenaten tried to erase him, shutting temples, chipping his name from walls, exalting the visible Aten sun disk instead, the hidden god did not disappear, he simply waited, and after Akhenaten's death, his name was restored. His temples reopened, his priests returned. For what is hidden cannot be destroyed, it can only be forgotten or remembered, and Amun was always remembered. In the end, Amun is not merely a god of the past, He represents something eternal within human consciousness, the drive to understand that which lies beyond perception. The recognition that behind all light there is darkness, and behind all form, formlessness. He is not a being to be seen or described, but a truth to be approached in stillness, in devotion, and in awe. He is the silence before creation, the breath between thought, the whisper in the wind that makes us turn our heads and wonder if something was there. Amun, the hidden one, whose shrine lies not only in Thebes, but in the hidden chambers of the human soul. Ra, the Egyptian god of the sun, on a papyrus background, October 3, 2017. As Egypt entered the Middle Kingdom, a time of renewed stability following the fractured era of the First Intermediate Period, the city of Thebes, once peripheral, had grown into the heart of a reunified nation. With Thebes' ascendancy came the spiritual rise of its local deity, Amun. No longer the obscure god of winds and hidden things worshipped in modest shrines, Amun began to step into a much larger role, one that would gradually redefine the Egyptian understanding of divinity. His rise was not through conquest, not through enforced orthodoxy, but through integration, through an ideological and theological shift so profound it reshaped the very nature of godhood in Egypt. Pharaohs of the 11th and 12th dynasties, recognizing the symbolic and political potential of a god who embodied hidden power and divine legitimacy, elevated Amun to the forefront of national worship. These rulers were not merely military conquerors, they were architects of spiritual unity, fusing religion with rulership in a way that made divine favor inseparable from political authority. It was during this period that Amun was no longer just a god among many. He began to be spoken of as a god above many. Temples expanded. Priestly institutions organized and multiplied. His role shifted from local to cosmic. But the true theological transformation came with a bold and powerful syncretism. Amun merged with Ra, the ancient solar deity of Heliopolis. This was not just an act of religious convenience, it was a metaphysical synthesis. Ra, long venerated as the sun god, the visible illuminator of all life, the divine king who sailed his solar bark across the sky each day and through the underworld each night, represented presence, power, and permanence. Ra was light itself. In contrast, Amun was everything Ra was not, the unseen, the mysterious, the silent force behind existence. By uniting these two principles, Egyptian theology created something revolutionary. Amun-Ra, the god who was both the manifest and the hidden, both light and shadow, both immanent and transcendent. He was the visible sun, yes, but also the dark void from which all things emerged. He was the breath of the wind and the heat of the sun. He was form and formlessness, being and non-being. This union gave birth to a concept of divinity more abstract and philosophical than any that had come before it in Egypt. In this new identity, Amun-Ra became not only the creator god, but the ground of being itself. He was the one who comes as one, but who creates millions. As the great hymns to Amun describe, he generated the gods, he ordered the cosmos, he sustained kingship and heard the cries of the poor. He did not merely exist in heaven or in temples, he existed within all things, his presence woven into the structure of reality. This belief was not limited to the priests and scribes, it permeated every layer of society. Farmers gave thanks to Amun-Ra for the fertility of their fields. Soldiers prayed to him before battle. Artisans whispered his name into their carvings. For the kings, he was both patron and proof of divine right. This belief was reflected materially and monumentally in the growing grandeur of the Karnak temple complex in Thebes. Over generations, pharaohs expanded it, each ruler adding halls, pylons, and obelisks as acts of devotion and declarations of legitimacy. Karnak was no mere religious site, it was a theological map carved into stone. A living temple city that mirrored the structure of the universe as the Egyptians saw it. Its hypostyle halls, filled with towering columns and painted ceilings, were built to inspire awe and humility, not just in the laity, but even in kings. It was here that the god's image was kept hidden in a dark sanctuary, seen only by the high priest and the pharaoh. In this way, Amun-Ra's mystery was preserved, even as his presence dominated the land. The priesthood of Amun grew to extraordinary power, sometimes rivaling the authority of the pharaoh himself. These priests did not merely perform rites, they held political sway, directed economic resources, and advised in matters of war and governance. Their interpretations of divine will were sought before campaigns, before crownings, before law. Oracles were delivered in Amun's name, carried on sacred barks, where the god chose directions by how the bark moved. Through this system, the divine became a living voice within the kingdom. The priests preserved balance, not just ritual purity, but the cosmic order, Ma'at, upon which all Egyptian life depended. Yet Amun-Ra was not confined to Thebes alone. His reach extended deep into Nubia, where at Jebel Barkal and Apata, he was worshipped with equal reverence. The Kushite kings of the 25th dynasty, dark-skinned rulers from the south who conquered and ruled Egypt, identified themselves as sons of Amun. They built temples in his honor that mirrored Karnak and carried his theology across both lands, uniting Egypt and Nubia not just under a throne, but under a shared divinity. Amun-Ra's supremacy transcended ethnicity, geography, and even politics. He was becoming more than a national god, he was becoming universal. The spread continued westward. In the Siwa oasis, far from the Nile Valley, an oracle of Amun gained fame throughout the Mediterranean. The Greeks who traveled there equated Amun with their own supreme deity, Zeus, naming him Zeus Amun. Even Alexander the Great, on his campaign of conquest, made a pilgrimage to the temple at Siwa, where he sought and received affirmation of his divine sonship. Thus, Amun-Ra's name traveled beyond the sands of Egypt and into the scrolls of foreign kings and philosophers. But no supremacy goes unchallenged. In the 14th century BCE, a bold and radical experiment in religion erupted under Pharaoh Akhenaten. Rejecting the sprawling pantheon, Akhenaten declared Aten, the visible sun disk, as the only true god. He dismantled the priesthood of Amun, shut the temples, erased the god's name from inscriptions, and moved the capital to a new city, Akhetaten. Aten, unlike Amun-Ra, was visible singular, without intermediaries. He demanded no mystery, no shadow. But the revolution was brief. Akhenaten's vision, perhaps too stark, too sudden, never took root beyond his court. After his death, his successors quickly reversed his reforms. The worship of Amun-Ra returned, not as a fallen cult, but as a river redirected. His name was restored to walls, his image to sanctuaries, and his priests to power. The temples opened once more, and the rituals resumed as if the interruption had been nothing more than a passing storm. Such is the resilience of what is hidden. Amun had always been the unseen force behind reality, the presence that endured even when denied. His return after Akhenaten's heresy was not merely political, it was symbolic of a deeper truth in Egyptian consciousness, that mystery, silence, and the unseen are not to be feared or erased, but honored. In Amun-Ra they had found not only a god but a philosophy, a sacred understanding that the divine does not always scream its presence. Sometimes it waits, sometimes it withholds, and sometimes it simply is. Through all changes, of dynasty, empire, and age, Amun-Ra remained the central axis around which Egypt's spiritual world revolved. He was the unseen root, the radiant bloom, the god who was all and nothing, the breath that moved through every stone and every soul. Egyptian gods Ra and Khonsu. Through the long twilight of pharaonic Egypt, as the world shifted around its borders and foreign empires carved their names into its stone, the worship of Amun-Ra endured like an ancient heartbeat beneath the changing rhythms of time. In the late period, when native Egyptian dynasties struggled to hold their own against the tides of conquest, from Libyans to Persians and later Greeks to Romans, Amun-Ra remained more than a relic of the past. He was still the spiritual axis of Egypt, a divine flame flickering steadily, even as crowns changed hands and scripts changed tongues. To the Persians who once ruled as distant lords over the Nile Valley, Amun-Ra represented continuity. Though they favored their own Zoroastrian traditions, the ancient temples were not destroyed. The god was respected as the foundation of a deeply rooted civilization, too sacred, too vast, to suppress. When the Greeks arrived first as traders, then as conquerors, they did not reject Amun-Ra. Instead, they absorbed him. Greek philosophers, mystics, and rulers were fascinated by Egyptian knowledge, and saw in Amun the outline of their own Zeus, only more ancient, more mysterious, more elemental. Thus, Amun became Zeus Ammon, a syncretic deity blending Greek theology with Egyptian metaphysics. His image changed, now not only a god with a hidden name, but also a horned deity, crowned with the solar disk, whose likeness appeared in temples across Egypt and even in Greece and Libya. To the Romans he was known as Jupiter Ammon, and his cult, while no longer at the center of state religion, maintained a potent legacy. Soldiers, rulers, philosophers, and pilgrims still journeyed to the Siwa oasis, to consult his oracle, to ask for divine affirmation or guidance in moments of doubt. But Amun-Ra's true power had always been more than political. It was philosophical, cosmic, deeply personal. To kings he was the validation of divine rule. To priests he was the source of sacred knowledge, the breath of creation, the power behind Ma'at, the force that balanced all things. To common people, he was father and protector, the god who did not need to be seen to be felt. His reach extended far beyond borders and beyond temples. It stretched into the inner world of the worshipper. He was awe, mystery, order, and compassion, woven into one divine presence. The Karnak temple complex, at the height of its influence, was a city unto itself, a microcosm of the universe as the Egyptians understood it. Its towering columns were carved not only with symbols of power, but with texts of deep theological insight, hymns, cosmologies, metaphysical meditations that describe the creation of the world not as an act of might, but of thought, of breath, of will. Amun-Ra, the god who was both nothingness and being, was said to have created the world not through battle or chaos, but by speaking it into existence, by thinking it. The world, in this vision, was not an accident or war trophy. It was the natural result of divine thought. These texts and beliefs did not vanish when Egypt's political fortunes waned. Even as Roman roads cut through the valley and Latin became the language of empire, the whispers of Amun-Ra remained. They lived on in the rituals that persisted in hidden temples, in the secret practices of priests who passed their knowledge like torches in the dark. His statues were still honored in remote sanctuaries, his hymns were still sung, softly, under starlit skies by those who remembered. But history moved forward with heavy feet. As the Roman Empire embraced Christianity, a new theology arose, one that also spoke of an unseen God, one that embraced monotheism and sacred order, but which no longer tolerated the old ways. Gradually, the temples were shuttered. Offerings ceased. The last high priests of Amun watched as their line was extinguished, not by sword or decree, but by the slow erosion of belief. The god of silence was himself silenced, but only outwardly, for Amun-Ra had never been entirely of stone or gold. He had never demanded visibility. He was the god of the veiled truth, and truths like that do not die, they transform. And so Amun-Ra lived on in mystical echoes. In the philosophies of Alexandria, where Greek, Egyptian, Jewish, and early Christian thought met and merged, the idea of Amun, the hidden, supreme, unknowable presence, echoed beneath new names, in the writings of Plotinus, in the Gnostic Gospels, in the monastic meditations of desert mystics. There are shadows of Amun-Ra's theology, the divine that is both transcendent and immanent, beyond comprehension yet closer than breath. Some scholars have pointed to these overlaps and asked whether the Egyptian vision of godhood, the divine as both light and shadow, presence and absence, unknowable and intimate, was one of the silent seeds planted deep in Western religious thought. When we speak of a God who is unseen yet everywhere, of a creator who made the world not through violence but through word and will, are we, even unknowingly, speaking remnants of an older truth? The names have changed, the temples have fallen, the sacred processions have long since turned to dust. But the idea that something greater lies behind the world we see, something that breathes meaning into matter, that gives order to chaos, that holds us even when it is invisible, that idea endures. That idea is Amun-Ra, and perhaps that is his most enduring miracle, that he was never just a deity of one nation, or one era. He was a concept clothed in myth, a force hidden within the human need to believe that there is something more than light, more than wind, more than life, that behind all movement, behind all forms, there is a source, silent, unseen, eternal. Amun-Ra is no longer carved into fresh stone, but he remains where he has always been, in the space between what we know and what we feel, in the longing of the human spirit to reach beyond the visible. Not just a name, but a question. And in that question, an answer waiting quietly to be heard. Pharaoh consulting with the Egyptian gods, there is something in the heart of every human being that reaches for what cannot be touched, that listens for what cannot be heard, that searches for what cannot be named. That is where Amun-Ra lives, not just in the temples or texts, but in the soul's quiet yearning for the infinite. His story is not merely the tale of a god of ancient Egypt. It is the unfolding of the human attempt to understand the divine not as spectacle, but as presence. A presence so total, so encompassing, that it hides itself in everything. Amun-Ra was never content to be just a deity with a face or form. From the beginning he transcended the limitations of mythology. He was the voice behind creation, the unseen force before light, the thought that preceded manifestation. In a culture as visually rich and symbolically saturated as ancient Egypt, to worship a god who could not be fully shown was revolutionary. Amun was the hidden one, not because he was far away, but because he was too near, too vast, too intimate to be contained in sculpture or word. When he merged with Ra, the blazing sun god of Heliopolis, the duality of presence and absence became divine unity. Amun-Ra was at once the sun that lights the world and the darkness that conceals its source. He was a living paradox, the god of opposites reconciled. The priests and philosophers who served him were not just functionaries of ritual, they were custodians of a metaphysical system. To them, the daily rising of the sun was a divine act, a reminder that existence is not guaranteed but renewed with intention. The universe was not a machine but a breathing being, kept in balance by Ma'at, the sacred principle of truth, harmony and order. Amun-Ra, as both the author and the upholder of this balance, was seen not as a distant overlord, but as a cosmic partner. To live rightly was to live in accordance with him, to act with justice, to speak with truth, to respect the sacred, was to reflect his light, however dimly. This theology was not just elite speculation, it permeated Egyptian life. Farmers praised Amun-Ra for rain and growth. Craftsmen carved his symbols into walls not just for beauty, but to invite the divine into space. Kings declared that their authority came not from conquest alone, but from harmony with the hidden order he represented. Even the poorest pilgrim, carrying a small offering to Karnak, approached the god with the expectation not of punishment but of recognition, that the divine saw the heart and answered sincerity with presence. Inside the great halls of Karnak, surrounded by towering columns carved with hymns and mysteries, something larger than religion unfolded. It was not just a place of worship, but a living cosmology, a symbolic map of existence itself. The temple's design echoed creation, its inner sanctum symbolizing the primordial mound from which life emerged. The god within was not simply enthroned, he was waiting in the silence, inviting seekers to draw closer, not with eyes but with inner understanding. Pilgrims did not go there to see Amun-Ra, they went to remember that he could never truly be seen. And so when dynasties rose and fell, when foreign armies crossed the Nile, when even the pharaohs became memories carved in sandstone, Amun-Ra remained, not as an idol but as an idea, a principle, a spiritual constant. The Greeks who heard of him recognized something familiar. They called him Amun and equated him with Zeus, but still felt the difference. Zeus could be imagined, painted, dramatized. Amun-Ra remained veiled, elusive, more silence than speech. And that silence ironically spoke volumes. It told of a god whose power did not need to shout, a god whose majesty was in stillness, in invisibility, in being the breath within the breath. Even when his temples were shut, when Christianity and later Islam reshaped the spiritual landscape of Egypt, the memory of Amun-Ra endured in quiet ways. His statues were buried, yes, but often with care. His names were scraped off, yet whispered still in secret. And beyond ritual, his philosophy lived on in the mystical traditions that grew in Egypt and beyond. In Gnostic texts, in the Neoplatonist writings of Plotinus and Proclus, in Sufi poetry that described God as the hidden treasure who longed to be known, we hear again the echo of Amun, the hidden one, the unseen source. And today, thousands of years later, as people walk among the ruins of Karnak and Luxor, few may know the words of the old hymns, but many feel what cannot be explained. The silence between the stones is not empty, it vibrates with memory. It waits, like the god himself once waited in the darkened sanctum, veiled in gold and mystery. Those who pause, who listen, not just with ears but with that deeper intuition we call spirit, may sense something. Not just the past, not just awe, but the presence of a divine idea that never truly faded, because Amun-Ra was never about domination, he was about invitation, to look deeper, to live in alignment, to honor what is unseen. In that sense he was not only Egypt's god. He was humanity's mirror, reflecting the eternal question that drives philosophy, art, science and prayer. What lies behind the light? What animates the air? Who breathes through us, though we cannot see? That question endures, and so in a sense does Amun-Ra. Not as a god of temples, but as a presence in the human story. A presence that asks us not to see, but to seek, not to possess, but to wonder, not to dominate, but to revere, hidden, eternal, awaiting.